Go ahead.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure. So, guys, thanks for inviting me. It's great to join you again. I can't see you, although hopefully we'll be able to do something about that in the future. But I'm really glad to be with you. I'll try to keep this as quick as I can because I know we actually have a fairly lengthy list of lightning talks tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Scot Bayless. I've been in the game business for far longer than I'd care to admit. That first title on the top left was Pool of Radiance. I worked on that in 1987. I think we published it in 1989. Uh, I've been a coder, a designer, an art director. And for about 15 years, I was an executive at some of the big shops like Microsoft and Capcom. But what we're talking about today is something that's very near and dear to my heart. And in fact, it's really the thing that kind of led me into the world of game development, and that's game design. I did my first designs in the world of paper games before computers were really a thing. It was the Apple II was brand new, and games hadn't really landed on that platform yet. The Commodore PET wasn't even out yet. And so some of my very earliest work was for pen and paper games. And I enjoyed it so much, I decided that I would try to do it with computers. But it's relevant to this conversation because that notion of game design as mind control is something that really emerged out of the presence of computers in the world of games. And I'll try to explain what I mean by that. It has a lot to do with a property of games that are driven by software that's different from other kinds of games, and that boils down to a pattern of action and reaction that either occurs with other humans in some games, or it occurs with a computer at the other end of the relationship. So let's talk about a little bit about what I mean by game design as mind control. I'm actually going to start with a quote from a writer a lot of you guys probably know about. And yeah, we're going to actually talk about the woo first. Hopefully you'll understand what I mean by that in just a moment. His name is Stephen King, and he wrote a book many years ago called On Writing. And it was full of really interesting insights about how he thinks about the act of writing and what it does to the audience when they read his work. And he made an observation that really resonated for me. He said, when somebody reads his work, we've engaged in an act of telepathy. No Mythy Mountain shit, it's real telepathy. And he actually had a point, because what he was talking about was the fact that when you read the written word, what's happening is the things that were in Stephen King's head are getting into your head. And while maybe it's not the kind of telepathy you would see in the movies, it is actually the real deal. You're creating thoughts, impressions, images in people's minds through a medium of written words. And games can do that too, but they're different. And if writing is telepathy, game design really is mind control. And it has to do with the difference being action. In games, when I, as a designer, manipulate you, that's aimed at getting you to do something, invariably. That's really what I mean when I say mind control. I do things with the game that cause you to change your behavior. And if I do it well, it's actually entertaining and you'll want to do it more. So let's talk about that a little bit. First, let's talk about the bait. What do I mean by that? Well, you'll see in just a moment. So our neurochemistry, and you guys already know this is not a big secret. It rewards us for finding hidden things. We're genetically programmed for curiosity. That's not a surprise to anyone, but it's an incredibly powerful tool in the hand of game designers because they know that and they will take advantage of it. And that's in part, their job, to create impressions in people's minds that cause them to change their behavior. So let's talk about a couple of examples. So what is that? Well, if you played World of Warcraft, you know what that is. That's a torch. Well, okay, so what? Yeah, it's a torch. but its real purpose is to incite your curiosity. And one of the things I find really interesting about the design of World of Warcraft is that very quickly players are trained to understand that torches actually mean something. And this is almost always true. If you place a torch in World of Warcraft, it's because you want someone to go somewhere. If you're running down a road from the Night Elf starting area to Dalaran in World of Warcraft, if you see torches standing near the side of the road, what that tells you is that there's actually a pathway you can follow, and there's something interesting to do. They do it all over the game, and they do it for a reason. It's meant to teach you to be curious whenever you see a torch, and you can't help it. I mean, even if you know they're yanking your chain, unless you've played through that part of the game a bazillion times, you're going to be curious, and you're going to have to go look. That's the purpose of that device. So in the world of game design, this is called luring. And it's actually an application of something that in the world of psychology, they call continuous operant conditioning. And what that means is that it's a pattern that you know is highly reliable. You, as the one being conditioned, learn very quickly that when I see a torch, that means something special, and I should go do something about it. There are other kinds of operant conditioning that come into the world of games. We're going to talk about that too. So, okay, pop quiz, what does this mean? Well, we all know what this means, right? It means this most of the time. It means that if I open this thing up, I'm going to find something interesting. I'm going to find something valuable. I'm going to find something that makes my life a little better in the game I'm playing. And we've been taught that over and over and over again, except that sometimes it means this. And scary things happen. And sometimes my character gets wiped out and I have to do a massive run back or whatever. But the point is, there's a degree of uncertainty. That's actually really important, because sometimes it occasionally leads to something like this. I get some kind of fat loot, and yay me. So what's happened here? What's happened is that there's a pattern now of being taught that that treasure chest means something, and then being taught that the outcome is not certain. Well, is that important? Yeah, it is. And if you study psychology, you'll know that in the world, or the early work of B.F. Skinner, when he was conceiving the notion of operant conditioning, one of the observations he made was that uncertainty actually increases the response of the test subject. Not only does it make the subject learn more quickly, but it makes the conditioning stick better and for longer. So what we're really doing with a pattern like this is something called variable ratio operant conditioning. That means that if we change things up a little bit and create a degree of unexpectedness in the outcome, especially if there's a bigger reward on the tail end sometimes, and we're going to come back to that, the result is a very powerful effect on the player. They learn something, they learn to change their behavior in order to respond to this conditioning. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm simply saying that it's a thing that the designer teaches the player, and quite often to their benefit. I mean, this kind of pattern actually in the main, especially in the world of RPGs, you can think of it, I think, as a benign manipulation. That's not always true, and we'll get to that. So luring is just about everywhere in games. This is actually a shot from Breath of the Wild. I'm sure most of you guys recognize that. So take a look at what's going on here. We've got Link standing at the brink of the mountains, and there are some things in the picture that I think are actually really important. This stuff happens all over the place in Breath of the Wild, and Breath of the Wild is not unique in any respect. But especially in an open world game, it's very important to give people cues as to where to go and what to do. So what do you see here? Well, for the first thing you see is a torch. Oh yeah, that thing. And if you go back down the mountain from here, you'll actually see other torches. What's it doing? It's telling you go up the mountain. Again, people have been conditioned to that, but it's actually a valuable tool for the designer to help people go to the right place so they're not wandering around lost and bored. But there's more to this. There's this thing. I don't even really remember what this is, but that's not the point. The point is, it's obviously something important. It's obviously something that's going to take some effort to reach, and that's the point. So one of the things that luring gets used to do in a lot of cases is give people a sense of a goal. So I know somehow, for some reason, I need to get up there. I may not even know why yet, but by God, I'm going to get up there. And actually, they even go further with that. You see that beam up there? That's actually visible from a long way off. So now you've got hinting that happens over very long distances. All of it designed to get the player to go to a place where something interesting is going to happen. Okay, so now let's talk about a different kind of mental manipulation. And I call it the 100% compulsion. I wish I could actually do this live because I would love to ask you guys, how many of you actually got to 100% on Metroid Prime? Because I know a bunch of people who did, and they had to work really hard to do it. And that time of 5 hours and 16 minutes is actually a very good time. I know people that spent days and days and days trying to get to 100% in that game because some of the secrets in that game are very well hidden. But the point is, people will work incredibly hard to get to 100%. And that gets used all the time in games. A lot of it these days is aimed at what's called engagement, but it's really about giving people an opportunity to be excited about the future. And it's used not just in games like Metroid Prime, which would argue is kind of a mainstream game, but it's also used in casual games all the time. In casual games, it's a much more manipulative thing because engagement, which is really what completion is about, from a behavioral perspective, is something that casual games, especially free-to-play games, rely on heavily because they've known for a long time that engagement equals revenue. So the designers of casual games are constantly looking for ways to keep you plugged in, keep you moving forward, keep you trying to complete whatever it is they put in front of you. And you can see here on this screen, this is from Candy Crush, and it's actually in German. I'm sure you guys noticed that. Doesn't really matter. The iconography is what matters here. So take a look at that. See that check mark? That's another completion indicator. When you've done that particular activity in the game, you get a little check mark. When you get all the check marks, there's a reward in store for you. But it's not just that. There's also, oops, sorry, went the wrong way. There's also this. And this trick gets used all over the place. You'll see it in games like Angry Birds. You'll see it in Candy Crush. You see it everywhere. And it's a different kind of completion incentive, because what you're really saying is you did the thing, but you didn't do it as well as you could. So now there's an incentive to go back and do it again. And this is a very powerful motivator for a lot of people. And frankly, I'm one of those people. I'm a raging completionist, and I've just had to accept the fact that that's kind of my kryptonite. I want to do all the things because it feels good when I do. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that feeling good. So, okay, here's another example. This is from Steam. This is an achievement display from Steam. The game actually doesn't really matter that much. I just thought the presentation was really interesting because one of the things that they do is they emphasize the relationship between your achievement and the success of others. Now, those numbers are present in almost any presentation of achievements on Steam, but this one's actually really interesting because they put a bar graph in place, which actually gives you a really powerful graphical representation of how many other people did the same thing. And so you're incented to look for achievements where the completion percentage of all players is actually fairly low, but you did it. And that's a really powerful motivator. In fact, I know there are a lot of people who buy games on Steam just to get the achievements, just so that they can elevate their status on Steam. So, okay, let's talk about the fix. What's the fix? Well, there's this thing in games that happens all the time. Designers of games for decades have cheated. They're constantly lying to the player. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a thing. Well, why would a designer do that? Why not just build a game to be completely honest and, whatever happens, happens? Well, there's some problems with that. Let's start with the easy one. Cheating allows you to create the illusion of intelligence especially in strategy games. Having an AI player play in a smart and sophisticated way is actually really difficult. So because the software has perfect knowledge. There are a whole bunch of things that designers can do to give the computer an edge so that it looks like it's being smart, when in fact really what it's doing is it's just operating on knowledge that normally would be obscured, but it has access to it. Is this a bad thing? No, it's really not. The bad part, and this is a pitfall that designers fall into all the time, the bad part is sometimes they get caught, and when you get caught, there's a real problem, because then the player knows that the game's not playing fair. And if the player knows that the game's cheating, even if they kind of knew it probably was, when they see an actual clear example of the game not playing fairly, it breaks the illusion completely, and they probably won't play the game anymore. So there's another thing that I find really interesting in the realm of cheating. This actually happens in World of Warcraft a lot, which is why I use the screenshot. So this is a collection quest in World of Warcraft. Well, what do they do to cheat in a collection quest? Well, quite often what the designers do at Blizzard is the first item on the list that you need to get, whether it's 3 of something as it is here, or it's a list of 10 things you have to find that are all different. The first one, this is especially true when those things are sort of random drops, right? There's no guarantee that if you kill a mob, you're going to get the thing you want. The first time you try to acquire the item, what they'll do is they'll cheat on your behalf, and they'll basically just give it to you. Well, why do they do that? They do that to show you that the thing you just did is how you get the item you're seeking. And it's actually really effective. So now you've got one, you've got maybe 2 or 3 more to go, or maybe you've got 10 more to go, but at least now you know what to do. It's a hugely effective tool for keeping players in the know about how to play the game successfully. So there's another thing about this that I actually find really interesting. This is something, I have a World of Tanks screen up here because this actually happens in World of Tanks. And I have a little bit of inside information that confirms that this technique is in use. So in World of Tanks, it generally tries to play fair. However, if you have just spent money in the game, it will bend the random number system in your favor just a little bit. And it's like on the order of a fraction of a percent. But it has a big impact because in World of Tanks, they're rolling dice all the time for things that you're doing. When you're shooting at something, there's a little bit of randomness in where the shot goes. When you hit another tank, there's a little bit of randomness about how much it'll penetrate or whether it'll bounce off. There's a bunch of random numbers that are going on all the time in World of Tanks. And if you have spent money, they'll give you just a tiny little edge. So what happens? Well, what happens is your win rate goes up and you feel great and you're happy and you're excited and you play the game a lot. And then over time, if you don't spend money, they will start shaving that bonus down a little bit at a time. And after about a week, you're kind of back to being normal. Now, is that bad? Well, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure I can answer it, but what it creates is a sense of frustration because you were doing well, you're succeeding in the game, and then suddenly you're not succeeding, and it incites you, even though you don't really know it, to spend money again and improve your outcome. Because every time you spend money, there's this little period of time where things go well, and you get trained to that pattern. And then finally, little wins are seductive. Anybody who's gone to Las Vegas knows about this. If you played a slot machine, you know how this works. I actually find it a little ironic. It says big win. Big win doesn't really mean big win. It just means that you got something, probably not as much as you've put in, but you got something. And so what slot machine designers do is they design their games to give you these little wins. Well, why do you do that? Because your autonomic response to those little wins is positive, and it tends to train you toward wanting to get more of that and do the thing that gets you more, which is put money in the machine. So let's talk about dopamine. We all know that this is a thing with games, really no surprise there. But I do think there's some interesting ways of kind of breaking down what it means when we talk about getting little dopamine hits out of playing a game. So I'm going to take you through sort of a brief taxonomy of neurochemical triggers. Most of these will be familiar, but hopefully there'll be a little bit of insight that's useful to you. So first, there are what you would call intrinsic neurochemical triggers. Those are things that are really about you. And what I mean by that is things like celebration. So if I'm on a slot machine and I get a big sparkly display and it says you win and a bunch of coins fall down into the hopper, all of that is about making you feel good. And there's a bunch of science behind this. Companies like IGT actually spend enormous amounts of money on studying human behavior around gambling. And it really boils down to pacing dopamine hits in a way that players notice the difference. So if you hit them too much, they kind of saturate and they don't respond well. So you have to make sure that you get the timing of those dopamine hits tuned correctly so that people feel the bump. And in fact, one of the things they've learned is that people are different about that. So people have different response rates and different decay rates, and they actually build their machines to hit different patterns. And you'll see that people, if you ever talk to somebody who's a really avid slots player in Vegas, they'll tell you that they have their favorite machines. Guess why? It's because the dopamine hits from these celebrations are the ones that are tuned for their pattern of behavior. Then there's discovery. We love finding out stuff. And this goes back to what I talked about at the beginning. The notion of finding things is something that we as humans are really attracted to. And those dopamine hits are really powerful. And that could be something like seeing this beautiful vista from the top of a mountain, or it could be something like opening a chest to find a new thing. There's a whole list of things that's essentially boiled down to turning over rocks to find shiny things, because that's what we're programmed to do. And then, of course, loot. Well, that boils down to I got a shiny, and we love shinies. We especially love shinies that are useful to us. So this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, but it is a very powerful intrinsic motivator. And again, paced correctly, they can keep you clicking the button or pushing the joystick just about forever. So what about extrinsic motivators? Well, you're gonna recognize these, especially anybody who's spending a lot of time around social media and or online games. You're going to recognize these. And I'll start with peacocking. This is really powerful stuff. I mean, humans love to do this. They love to do this long before video games existed. But now you've got a vehicle where the diversity of your ability to peacock is magnified by orders of magnitude. And the reach of your peacocking is immense. And of course, this isn't just in games, it's also in social media. But in games, it's really a powerful thing. And in fact, if you look at the stats around in-game purchases, and this is in every game that I'm aware of, from Fortnite to Counter-Strike to you name it, if it's an online game where people see each other, the number one thing that people spend money on is looking cool. I guess that's not really a surprise, but it is a pretty powerful tool for designers, because it's a way to keep people excited about what they're doing. Victory. I mean, not everybody feels this, but there's a large segment of people who are highly competitive when they play games, and they want that sense of winning. And it turns out that when they feel that bump from a win, if they do it with other people on their side, it's 10x more powerful. I've lost track of the number of people I've talked to who talk about what boils down to the Alamo moment, where me and my buddies, we were in big trouble, but we managed to kind of fight our way out of it. That's a thing that people never get tired of, and it's a hugely powerful motivator, and it is directly driven by brain chemistry. And then finally, adulation. Again, not a surprise, but being told "good job" is a huge motivator, and there's a lot of science that shows when somebody does that, there are chemicals released in your brain that make you want to do it again. So that's really the overview of design as mind control. I think we're on the cusp of some really interesting evolution in what all of this stuff means. And I think the driver of that evolution is going to be AI. And we all know that generative AI can do some very interesting things. I think we're going to see these kinds of patterns change significantly as AI gets better at figuring out how to manipulate them. I think most of that is going to be good news. But my advice is, when AI really gets its stride in the world of gambling, stick to poker with humans, because the AI is going to do things to your brain that you may not really want it to do. So that's it. Hopefully that was interesting. And if you have questions, I probably have some answers. And I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. We got some applause, so I'm going to yeah, ask. We'll get you out here one time soon as well. Any questions? Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, so the question was, are there frameworks to sort of come up and implement these strategies when you're designing games, like anything sort of standardized that some of the studios might follow when they approach trying to incorporate these strategies?
It's actually a really good question, and the answer is on the creation side, not so much. On the testing side, yes, a lot. And what I mean by that is that there are sort of layers of validation that some of the big studios do, and this is especially true at places like Electronic Arts, where they will do deep testing, in part to suss out the effect of stuff like this on people. Mostly, what people do is use measurement. They especially in the world of online games. I'm sure you guys know this, but there's an immense amount of telemetry that's pulled from from online games as people play them, and that telemetry is used to generate data that can be used to estimate the effectiveness of these various strategies on player behavior. And so I'm not aware of any framework that is generative yet. Most of that's done in a feedback. It's done with designers who have experience in this kind of manipulation, and then it is fed back through business intelligence, which is a lot of it's about telemetry, fed back to the designers, and then they devise responses to that. So that's the loop right now. But that's why, I mean, you can see that if you put AI in that loop, it's going to change the equation dramatically. And I don't really think we know how it's going to change it, but we know it will change.
Okay, great. Another one. You want to speak into?
Yeah, that's a great talk. Actually have two questions. The first one is, what do you feel is an ethical form of game design?
Oh,
Like specifically, like, well, let's just like very like specific, like say loot
yeah,
boxes. I know like Apple,
yeah.
all these app stores are banning a lot of uses of loot boxes. So what's an
Mm-hmm,
ethical way to use it? And the second question is, with your IGT slot machine example, I
mm-hmm.
know on the back end of these slot machines, there's like a, depends on the casino, there's generally like a one random number generator that goes into the game engine, whether it's a bingo card, a virtual bingo card, whatever it is. But how are
Yeah.
they building on the additional uh, game mechanics that you're referring to if there's only one random number that determines your spin? Because as far as I know, there's no memory between spins also.
Yeah, actually, this is a really interesting question. So let me actually let me go back to the first one. So before I lose my train of thought, so ethical. My personal take on the ethics of manipulation is that it boils down to: is this for the benefit of the player, or is this for the benefit of the developer, publisher, whoever? And I mean that's a little bit overly simplistic, because look, at the end of the day, studios need to make money or they can't keep doing what they're doing. But having said that, if you're manipulating somebody to get money out of them, then what you're really doing is behaving like IGT or any of the other big gambling companies. And I have a problem with it. I actually spent 6 months consulting on slots for mobile a few years back. And after 6 months of it, learning what I learned and seeing what I saw, I decided I just couldn't do it, because basically what they were doing was using dopamine and other neurotransmitters to create addiction loops. And while that's effective as hell, I couldn't stomach it. So for me, it essentially boils down to: am I doing all of that lootiness in Diablo 5 because it's just cool and people get to do really fun stuff, and they bought my game, and maybe they're paying $15 a month to keep playing my game, but I'm being honest with them, and I'm not manipulating them into giving me money just because I can. I don't really know any other way to approach that. And you're right. A lot of studios and publishers are backing away from loot boxes. to be really candid about that, almost all of that is driven by legislation. It's not really driven by any altruistic motive at all. And I'm not bagging on these guys. I know they're trying to do their job and they're trying to make money for the company. And I'm not judging the people involved. What I'm saying is the behaviors are driven by legislation. They're not driven by altruism. So if it weren't for the EU, for example, saying that's enough with the loot boxes, Haas, stop that, they'd still be doing it. Now, weirdly, some of this is cultural, because if you go to places like the Western Pacific Rim, particularly in parts of China, I mean, that's really where loot boxes came from, right? That pattern of behavior is different and means a different thing to players in some parts of the world. So I guess what I would say is, if the ethics boil down to I'm doing a thing the player wants me to do, then I feel better about it. But at the same time, there is a thing called gambling addiction. And I'm not really a big fan of selling crack to crack fiends. So I think I have to draw the line at I do my level best to try to give people a great, engaging, entertaining experience without manipulating them into giving me money because I can do it. And now I've lost my train of thought on the second question. It was also an excellent question. Can you ask that question again, please? I apologize.
Just on the slots.
On the slots. Right. Oh, and the random numbers. Okay, so there's an interesting thing about slots in particular. Some of you guys may know this. Most people don't. Pop quiz. What do they call a person who figures out the payout pattern for a given slot machine? Answer: they call them mathematicians. I think that's actually really important, because it implies a focus on achieving a successful pattern. It does not imply a focus on beneficial behavior of the player. So the random number systems are actually built to produce behaviors, and they are pre-programmed, because in the world of regulated gambling, the developers of those machines are not allowed to I'm doing air quotes, you can't see it, but I'm doing they're not allowed to cheat. That's not true in mobile. So if you play a slots game on your iPhone and it's not under regulation, they can do anything they want, and they will. I know, because I worked on a couple of those titles. What they will do is they will manipulate the outcome to produce the best possible behavior on your part. So they will literally give you wins. They'll trickle wins at you in order to get you to make the big investment and buy a bunch of coins, so you'll come back and play the game again. Then they'll take all your money. Now, in the world of IGT, they're not allowed to do that. So what they do instead is they develop patterns that rely on those rigorously generated random numbers that will approximate the ideal pattern for given players as much as possible. They generally don't vary those patterns within a single machine. In other words, if they set up a machine to aim at what they call dribblers, who are players who like lots of little small wins that don't really add up to as much as they put in, but they feel good, then they'll make machines produce a dribbler pattern. But there are other players who actually love the huge wins and don't mind losing a whole bunch along the way. And so there are other machines that will be set up to produce a very large win very rarely, but when it produces a large win, it produces a really large win, and everybody gets excited. So I'm kind of circling around your question. I'm not really answering it directly, and that's in part because the systems for producing those random numbers are highly guarded systems. And while I know in general about how they work, there's a lot I was not allowed to know about the internals of how those things produce the numbers they do. Hopefully that's a useful question.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Appreciate it. Good
My
having
pleasure.
you.
Yeah.
And I'll see you soon. So I'll have you if you can make Quill the host.
Okay. So let me stop sharing.
Yep.
And let me see. How do I make this one? Okay. can I make you make host?